first book is more about looking at everybody else and saying this is where you're wrong, whereas the second book is much more difficult to try and write for, because it's about trying to say where I'm wrong, and that's difficult for people to admit. So it's an extension of the first book. It does definitely help to have the first before you get onto the second, but it stands alone as well, so you don't have to necessarily get the whole package, as it were. I'm just throwing it out there as well, just trying to get as many sort of like feelers out there. I don't know exactly what your audience is going to be like, but if people are interested in slightly more risque card games, there's going to be a not safe for work card game that I'm working on next year, and it's going to be quite fun. So just, if people want to sort of keep tabs on that,
wait, what's the overall premise of the card
Twitter.
game?
It's a very silly game. It's about more to do with porn categories, and it's to do with sort of sex and sexuality, and just being really silly and just playing around with it, basically, in a more very healthy way. Well, at least I think it's healthy. When people look at it, they might think I'm crazy. But yeah, that's if people are sort of influenced it within that sort of direction. I'm not sure. Sometimes audiences can be more religious leaning, and therefore that sort of thing is taboo. So I wasn't sure. I at least gave you the chance to sort of back out of that one. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, David, I'd like to introduce you to Marty Camejo and Mac the Human, and remember Sammy Jenkins or the 420 Atheist. Welcome everyone. Yeah, you know Sammy.
Well, you know what? I'm just trying to get the stream up. It's meant to come up straight away because no, okay, it's not up. Hey, now I can see everybody. Yeah, Marty, Mac, and 420. Hey, good day to you too. Peace and respect to one and all.
Absolutely. Okay, so I've invited David here tonight because he's a fan of logic and critical thinking and things like that, to point out anywhere that I need improvement. Because I'd much rather be correct than proud. That's the general idea here tonight. So I think the format we're going to do is just an informal conversation. David's had almost no briefing, so he's going to be going almost completely off the cuff. And of course, I'll be saying things that I standardly often repeatedly say. Peace and respect, Math Pig. Welcome.
Oink.
Yeah, oink. So he's not actually a pig. Just so there's no confusion here. It's not a typing pig. Which I know that's disappointing. We would hope for one sometime, but oh well. Okay, so I'm just going to make some assertions about my beliefs within my religiosity that I think are reasonable statements, and then wherever the conversation goes from there is where it goes. If that sounds okay.
Absolutely. I'm just adjust this camera slightly. There we go.
There. Now you look taller. So I'm sure your feet reach the ground just fine. I'm sure you're not too terribly short. Okay, so I believe that ancient religions that are claiming that we are their ancestors, that is a progenitor idea, are speaking about their future acts that we will witness, and that there is no man on this earth authorship for any story that fits that description.
Whoa. Okay. So at that point, I'm going to say I didn't quite get the gist of certain words, and I'm certainly not going to accuse you of word salad because I know what you're on about. I know which direction you're going in. But so yeah, I'm going to need further clarification. So the specific sort of ancient was it specifically you said ancient religions?
I did, yes.
Religions was the word, yeah. What are they referring to specifically?
I'm saying that any of them that are talking about, how can I say that? That the stories that we have all over this earth have great commonality in that it's describing a set of events, and that those events have not yet happened, and those events will be performed by the authors, which are not people from this planet.
Okay, so when we say, first and foremost, when I say ancient religions, do you mean like very specifically, are we talking pre-Judeo-Christian? Are we talking before that? Obviously not so recent as to think of like Mormonism or anything like that. We're talking like way in the past.
It would include some of the religions that have survived this long, but okay. It would also include a lot of them that have gone extinct, something like that. That there's few or no followers that people know of that still hold to whatever given religion. For instance, I would make example of Native American Zuni, which is very ancient. Celtic religion, Zoroastrianism, on and on and on and on like that. The very old ones.
Okay, so straight away, I'm familiar with very sort of like on the surface level understanding of some of what you just said. The very first one I've never heard of. And so my specific understanding is going to be like next to nothing in terms of those specific beliefs. So it might be worth going over, if not just for my sake, some of the audience as well, trying to explain what those specific events are that they prophesize.
Well, and that's an interesting word, prophesy. Before I address you directly, I'd like to say that what I think prophecy is capable beings declaring their intent for the future.
Okay.
That they're able to do the things that they say they're going to do, that it's not mysterious or magical at all. They just have abilities that we don't necessarily understand, or we could not have accomplished, say, 200 years ago or something like that. Not that it's defeat of physics or anything similar to some kind of magic. And would you repeat exactly what you said, because I lost it?
That's right. The events themselves. Right. It's so within, if we are talking about prophecy and using that definition, it would be that it would be me saying, we can set up, flights to Mars. We haven't done it yet. We will we're on the cusp of that technology. We haven't got it yet, but I'm prophesizing. That would be considered a prophecy. For that definition. Okay.
Sure. The only difference is that right now we're not quite ready to do that. We're very close, but we're not quite ready. They would be claiming things they're already capable of doing. And
that's fine.
And probably not challenging to them in any way. Okay. So what would some of these actual acts that we would witness be? There's a list of them that occur in all of these ancient religions, and there's proprietary by religion labels for the series of events, like in the story of Thor, for instance, it's called Ragnarok. In the story of Heracles, it's the trials of Heracles. In Christianity, it's end times. And there's always a name for it. But the actual events themselves are always in the same order, and although I think using value systems that make sense to that society are describing the same set. And that set is this. The earth experiences an earthquake that is unlike any in the memory of man, historic or spoken in stories. Even to the point where when we have exaggerated ideas like the god Vulcan, that's not big enough. That followed by the dislodging of one of our planets, the realization, the dislodging of one of our planets, a meteorite approximately the size of a mountain that chemically interacts with ocean water, falls into an ocean, and there's a chemical reaction. The ignition of the planet Jupiter as a short-term star. A piece of a moon over Jupiter also being pulled in by the Earth's gravitational field. Another mountain falling into, but this time it falls into a freshwater system. Us in a binary solar system, from us in between two stars, that being the Sun and Sol and Jupiter, or Helios and Jupiter, and then the arrival of the ancient human ancestors who have never lived here.
Interesting. There's just so many lots of things that I've not really talked about that much as well. So those are all different claims that you're saying have been made over the eons, or whatever the appropriate word, and there's crossover between different belief systems, and that's, one says a subtly different story. And so so what was the overarching first point again, because I didn't manage to make a note of it? So you mentioned ancient religions that make you didn't use the word prophecy.
I said claim. They claim.
Claims.
Yeah.
So they make claims that are very similar to one another. And what else was it?
That's slightly flawed. I'm not saying they make claims that are very similar to each other. I'm saying there's a singular story that is told slightly different per culture.
Okay. Right. So, I think there's lots of different times I've seen this pointed out by other people, and they've noticed the similarities between, say, we can look at the sort of death of the sun being like a equivocation between the sun being Jesus and the sun being the literal star that we call the sun. And then it's in the sky and it sort of dips to a particular point, and people think, oh no, it's going to sort of fall off the earth and we're all going to die. And then it doesn't after 3 days. So then after 3 days, the sun is reborn. So that narrative then sort of feeds its way, and it has sort of like, it's a basic equivocation of the word sun. Basically.
Right. But that doesn't work in all languages. Right.
Yeah. So I wasn't sure what direction you wanted to go in. So that was sort of one statement, and then I didn't know whether there was like something else that came after it that you were going to go into.
And I suppose my initial assertion is that although contextualized for each individual culture as the culture was developed, the stories were customized, but is always telling the same stories. And there's only actually about 20 stories, I never counted them, but about 20 stories worldwide. And there is only overlap. There is no discrepancies. There is no added information one over the other. Like the difference between one might be a picture of a car accident. One might be a written description of a car accident in like a mathematical way and, charting everything. And the other one might be like an emotional writing about the same car accident, but they're all talking about exactly the same car accident, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I get the idea. So my mind immediately went to the hero's journey, which is for those who have not heard of that, it's basically every film that we've ever watched. It's an orphaned child that ends up, having bad things happen to them, and then they become a hero at the end, and they get to go into this big cycle, and it's all plotted out in like 12 points that they have to meet before they go back home and they solve the big crisis. So that's Harry Potter, that's Star Wars, that's everything. And it's tedious, frankly. It's not that I'm sadistic. I just want to see the bad guys win sometimes. There needs to be a legitimate threat there for me to believe them to be evil. Sorry, yeah. So where were we going with that? So I think, there's a degree of truth to that. There's, I haven't gone through the claimed 20 different stories, but I would probably just initially tending towards agreement. I hope that doesn't end the stream, but
I'll just make another assertion. It's fine.
Yeah, just keep going. It's not that. So initially, my thoughts are, I don't know enough about those specific claims, and so either we would have to sort of flesh out those specific claims, or we can move into something which is sort of more readily unpacked, if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. And what I was going to suggest is I had said that some of these stories carried through over time and they're not dead religions and we're familiar with them. For instance, Christianity is one of them. So
yeah, and I was only going to say these stories have sort of resonance with us because they mean something. We can relate to them. If I was watching something the other day, whatever it was just extras on a film kind of thing, and the director was sitting down with whoever it was, and they were saying about how the reason that their film was just so successful is because they so it might have been Harry Potter, but the reason it's so successful is because of the emotional connection and the sort of the characters that come out of it, and there's all these different emotions that could be laid out, and if we connect and we resonate with a particular character about in a certain situation, what would they realistically do? There's so many different scenarios where they went through how it could have been Dumbledore being gay, and just at that point J.K. Rowling just sort of like pushed back a script and said no, he wouldn't do this. Like there was something in the script that said he made a comment about a girl on a poster saying like not she's fit, or like Dumbledore would have been more eloquent than that, but it would have been inappropriate for the character.
Right.
And so when we then watch those films or engage in those books, that art, whatever it may be, what we get from it is just some sort of guidance of what do we do in a particular situation, in a scenario, because we seem to resonate with if it's not Harry because we haven't lost parents, it might be Ron because he's got a big family, or Hermione because she's sort of at that point in the story still a girl in a man's world, and she has to try and sort of do extra to try and prove her intellect, to try and she was muggle born or whatever, and that means that she's just sort of looked down on. So I know what it's like to look down on, therefore I resonate with that character, and she's sort of like is strong in that scenario, and therefore I'm going to be strong here. And it's anyway, sorry, I don't know where I was going with that.
That's okay. I can carry on with it. I think that, and this is another assertion that I believe is true. I think the personal interest stuff is just to make it memorable so that the fairy tales aren't lost. And it's only for coloring in the lines, and it's not intrinsic to what the picture is at all.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to need just some time to think about that. So flesh that out. What would you consider a line? What would you consider a sort of coloring in?
A hard line, to create the silhouette, the because it could have been black and white. It doesn't need to be colored in. Black and white would have been just fine if it was all just a list of facts. That would have still portrayed the story, but it wouldn't be compelling and memorable for a broader audience. Whereas things that are more emotionally based are more memorable for people. Something that is a line and something that is just coloring in. A line. Jesus has to be thought an idiot and even made fun of to the point that they will kill him to prove a point. In order that they can show off, that the truly ancient humans can show off their amount of technology and knowledge about the human body itself. That's a silhouette. Coloring in the lines is something, or using the crayon is something like Samson had the strength of a god, and he slain 10,000 with the jawbone of an ass. Where jawbone of an ass means someone speaks as a fool. It's not a physical weapon. But where slain means to convince someone out of their current position. So he used the jawbone of an ass. He was thought to be an idiot, but ultimately slain 10,000. Good job. But that's just painting in between the lines.
Interesting. So you, just to try and relate that as well, is there a story from our lifetimes that has, particularly like a TV film, piece of art, whatever it may be, that shows the exact same structure and the exact same argument, where you could say this line is very similar today in this story, kind of thing, and this is the coloring in for today, for the modern meaning?
Here's something I think obvious. Politics. Why do I have personal information about political figures and what they do in their private time? What's that got to do with the office?
It depends whether it was in the Oval Office. But no, carry on.
Very well might, but I'm not certain that it does, because
yeah.
Let's say the sitting president of the United States raped a young man who was delivering papers. I just outright nailed him down and raped him. Does that mean he makes bad decisions as a president? He obviously has, like some moral issues, no doubt. But does it mean he's a bad attaché for the United States, that he's a poor representation of the United States because he's immoral? Well, that could be argued. But certainly, like, my level of knowledge about what they do on in their private life is only painting in the silhouette. I don't even need that. It's not necessary to the office.
So yeah, this might go somewhere. So what we're describing there is an act as well. So I would sort of like more broadly sort of bring that back to, this might be one of the stories, actually. Well, not a whole story, but actions speak louder than words. Like these sorts of idioms that come out of these stories, I would say that rings true. So people can say whatever they like, but actions themselves speak louder. Now, can people do bad actions and have like immediate repercussions of like, I didn't realize what I was doing. Yes, that obviously happens. That there's scenarios where people have had a sort of weapon in their hand, or they're doing something like in the kitchen and they're chopping vegetables with a sharp knife, and they've ended up getting into an argument and they've stabbed a loved one or whatever, and then they've immediately like panicked and been like, what should I do? I'll bury them in the garden. It's like, no,
Brilliant.
like you know, you're just going to make it worse for yourself. Like, you haven't thought through, like, oh, you go places with this person and people know they exist and they haven't seen them for 3 months, so they then act in a particular way because they fear the consequences of their actions as a result of a particular society that enforces a particular stigma, for rightly or wrongly, for particular acts. So in terms of, I'm trying to think from a fallacious standpoint as well. So there's, and I always get them mixed up because there's the false cause, the false analogy, the false equivalence, equivocation, and they're all sort of like roughly slightly different from one another. So if I get the word wrong, it's all in the books.
I won't know it.
But yeah. So one of those 4 things is assuming, because I think it's a false analogy where somebody does or 2 things have something in common, therefore they are assumed to have something else in common.
Right.
So we can say, let's say we have pretty much roughly the same skin color, therefore we have the same bank balance. That doesn't make sense. Okay, 2 completely different parts of the world. You're a evil Bond villain on your island right now, and I am definitely not a Bond villain in front of a green screen. Wink, wink. So you get the idea. So you can sometimes, if I think applying it to the sort of line and the colors thing, and I'm still just sort of working this out in my head as we go along. So if I'm stumbling, then feel free to jump in. If you have that sort of line, the same sort of structure, and it does, I admit this sort of does resonate with me, and this does make some sense, and that the sort of coloring in changes over time. But yeah, I'm sort of struggling to keep anything sort of coherent as a response here. Have you got anything to sort of throw out there that you're thinking of?
To what end? What would I need to do or say? Math pig, this is admission that you missed the beginning of the show. That's all this is. We already shilled his books. Sorry, buddy.
And thank you for putting the links in the description, Robbie. So yeah, if at the minute, I'm willing to just run with the assumption so far.
Okay, so if I keep going with that, I could say something like, the constellation Virgo pre-existed Judaism. The proper name of the constellation Virgo is the house of bread. This is the direct translation of the words Bethlehem or Bethlehem. And it doesn't make sense to name a city house, because a city is not a house, unless it's named for a greater thing that is called house, which the constellation Virgo is, a greater, older thing than the town of Bethlehem. But there's a consistent storyline in those words, in these stories, not describing a place of the ancient Near East, but instead what is actually describing is our entire solar system from our exact point of view. For instance, Galilee means rotating gates. City walls don't rotate. That's just what did they have? A bunch of logs on it and people were constantly pushing it? No. No, the series of 12 rotating gates is the zodiac. And then Bethlehem is one position within the zodiac. Well, I can take that directly into the ancient traditions of astrology and say, well, does astrology tell this same story? Well, actually, yes, it does. Same as the Bible, where David, your name actually, Dawood, goes after Goliath. He goes after him in a certain position, and that position is Bethlehem, which is Virgo, which counterclockwise just precedes, as the planets turn per year, it just precedes the direction of perfect east. Okay. And where Goliath represents the fifth character out in the scene and or the fifth planet, Jupiter. And Goliath or Jupiter being realized as a short-term, very short-term, but a short-term star would be brighter than any other star in the sky. And in that next year after its ignition, or directly following its ignition, depending on where it gets ignited in Virgo, it would be the brightest star in the east, literally. Okay. And I can say that in astrology, for instance. I can say that Jupiter is the planet of enlightenment, written at a time when they didn't know it was flammable. But it's only the planet of enlightenment when Mercury, the dislodged planet, or David, who rushes out to the giant, but it's only the planet of enlightenment when it's in Mercury's house, which is Virgo. And yes, David is from Bethlehem. For instance, that's just a small for instance.
Okay, there's a lot there. So,
Yeah.
it might be that I'm not aware of certain stories and links between certain things, but it certainly gets interpreted, and I'm sure this isn't your intention, as jumping around to lots of different things. Now, is that, are you saying there's different, following on from what you just said about the different stories that sort of get subtly adjusted as they go over time? Are you saying there's this sort of astrology is one thing, and David and Goliath, and they all carry the similar sort of structure, and it's carrying some sort of truth? Is that the claim?
It would all have the same set of results in the same order that we'd be able to witness from this planet.
Sorry, I'm slightly lost. So is there a what would be the conclusion to this? So I'm just keep rolling and see where we go.
The conclusion to this. Well, you can't mean the absolute conclusion because that wouldn't even help. Okay. Those claiming to be our ancestors never having lived here author stories to explain their future acts on reality that we will witness, which shows that they were the authors of the story and the ones completing it. It's told in the enlightenment of the people by Jupiter, as if Jupiter could make your brain smarter. But yes, it literally can. Because it's part of these ancient stories that Jupiter enlightens you, and or Goliath is slain and the people really change their mind right away. I don't know. I mean, I could go into a lot of detail about it, but I'm not certain that would really do anything for you.
So, in terms of what I'm hearing, because it seems like there's a lot of different words where I don't quite know the link between them all. Does that make sense?
Oh,
so there was
okay.
there was Jupiter, and then there was Goliath.
Right.
And I wasn't sure if are you mentioning the just for absolute clarity, are you talking God Jupiter, planet Jupiter?
Right. Well, actually, it's the same thing. That's another story about it. But the Jupiter as a god is Hinduism, yes?
I am. Oh, you're testing me. Off the top of my head, I wouldn't know.
But let's see, he's got a different name in Hinduism than Jupiter as a god. But okay, so let me do a 1-for-1 and see if it makes sense for you in more detail on a specific point. Just that astrology has that Jupiter is the planet of enlightenment and that it enlightens human minds, which sounds ridiculous. Like how can a planet have an effect on my brain? You know, I guess if it was like falling toward the sun and running into the earth, that would affect my brain in certain ways. But it doesn't seem apparent why it would affect my brain in any other way. That they call Jupiter the planet of enlightenment is a really interesting term, because enlightenment is based on the idea of light versus dark, like being ignorant versus being informed. I live in darkness, I live in the light. Those kinds of ideas, right? Follow so far?
Roman, sorry. Yeah. I thought it
Roman.
was. Damn.
Jupiter Roman, yeah.
Oh. Yeah, carry on.
Okay, and we could talk about that mythology as well if you wanted to, or if you're more familiar with it, we could include it instead of astrology or instead of Christianity if you wanted.
Could it be useful as well to clarify, without judgment from me, as to do you believe in those sorts of things that you've mentioned? So it could be astrology, could be any of these ancient religions. Do you believe in all of those religions, as per believing in all of those stories being roughly the same, just adapted over time? Would you consider that all of those religions, basically, if you believe, let's say, in one denomination of Christianity, you wouldn't necessarily dismiss another denomination? You would consider them similar enough, at least you would consider them the same structurally with that line. Is that about right?
The first assessment or assumption was better. That I think that all of these are telling exactly the same story. I am personally persuaded that the beings who authored these, which could not have been human on this earth because of some of the things necessary you would have to know to write the story. Some things we have only recently discovered. Some things, there's one point we haven't even proven it yet. It's only a theory on the table right now, but they claim it's a truism. And it's only been a theory on the table for, I think, seriously less than 5 years, like to right now. But they claim it's a fact. So we haven't even proven one of them. I am personally persuaded that these things are true or will be true in reality, because the authors are able to make the things happen. I see the potentials in existence. For instance, the idea of an apocalypse that contains a lot of burning sulfur. You know, the dragon who breathes sulfur, the sulfur pits, the idea of fire and brimstone, the ideas of hell, things like this, all these kind of notions. We don't have a deposit of sulfur singular on the earth in one place that could be accidentally ignited that would affect the whole earth in the way described in these ancient ideas. It's just not here. However, there's a moon over Jupiter that is 90% yellow sulfur, and there's plenty of moon there. And if that were shattered and pressed this way, I'll say pressed in this direction and pulled in by the earth, it would be exactly as these ideas are describing. Like the entire earth would stink of sulfur.
Okay. So I personally wouldn't know exactly in terms of all these very specific measurements, quantities, like how much sulfur, what the exact claim is, whether it's possible to have that moon even being drawn towards Earth with just normal physics without interacting with the universe.
There is a series of interactions, yes.
Okay. So
where it gets shattered, then a chunk of it gets propelled this way.
Okay. So when again, just so I can visualize, do you mean chunk like? Is it like is it gas, a liquid, a solid? Like how is it? What is the exact claim about the interaction with the moon? What are those sort of steps?
That a smaller planet, a planet about the size of it, that is David or Mercury, the messenger, that Mercury, the planet, also the planet Mercury itself,
right,
gets dislodged from its orbit and collides with a moon over Jupiter, the moon Io specifically, and it becomes that there's a shattering that takes place. Now, right now, the moon Io is about the same size as the planet Mercury, and it's very, very hot and volcanically active. It also has a highly unusual gravitational field. That it's extremely active.
I think I have heard of this. I don't know the exact details off the top of my head, but yeah, I'm sure that that's true. So we're describing events that, as far as I'm aware, could only be, or at least the claim is, it could only be interacted with by these beings, as it were.
Right. This could never happen by itself. Yeah, there's no way this would happen by itself.
Yeah, we're not nuking Mercury and it's going off. Like
we have just no plan that I know of to do something like that. No.
Sure. So I don't particularly mind how it's done. It's just is there like is there a just out of interest, is there a purpose to it? Is it like, so Christianity would say something along the lines of it's done out of rage for the sins of humanity, or that sort of thing. Is this done as like an intergalactic game of croquet amongst the gods, where they're sort of just knocking planets around? Or
that's an interesting question. It's a set of announcements that were made very long ago, when each culture who got the announcement was very young in their culture, and then it's kept as a fairy tale over time. Thus, that's why it's painted in between the silhouette lines. I mean, a dot to dot would do just as well, but it's if you want it preserved, it has to be interesting to the human being in order that they want to preserve it in any way. Carried forward in time until such time that they decide we are ready to understand them. And then they perform the series that they said they would as a set of announcements, an RSVP, if you will.
Right. And okay.
Here I'm coming to the party now, a set of announcements. And then their actual arrival and their invitation toward us to join a larger human society than we are presently aware of.
Okay. So again, just exploring ideas. Where would that be? Are we talking like a because that sounds in structure in terms of those lines, like how, again, going back to Christianity, just as like a base for sort of common understanding between us. It's like how some people use English. It's like there's people in France listening to comedy in Sweden because they both use English. It's like really weird how that happens. So Christianity would say something like, there's the second coming, there is judgment day, and then the higher place is like a heaven.
Sure.
That's their sort of coloring in of this structure.
Sure.
Am I getting that right?
No, okay. It's perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Good. So in terms of like, what's the original, if I don't mind? Is that even a silly question? Like, where did the first claim for this structure come from?
I guess I don't. You're asking what's the oldest religion on the planet?
Not quite. Where did I mean, maybe it was that, but maybe I'm thinking like, is that structure of conversation, trying to understand to work. So I think there's certain claims, possibly, I'm just throwing this out there, maybe reading the stars and things like that predate religion. I don't know, but I think that would make sense.
Sure.
If there's
there's some debate on it, and we can't really know, of course, because it was just so darn long ago these things happened. Which is older, the Druids or the Hindu or astrology? Yeah, we can't really figure it out. They all claim to be the oldest, of course, but it's kind of hard to tell at some point.
I guess, I mean, I would initially just instinctively go with a primitive form of star reading, because religion it sounds like it's more organized, and I think possibly intuitively, possibly biasedly, would assume that religion steals and takes the best bits and then carries on and tries to sort of survive. Whereas like an endeavor to understand the stars and just go, oh, look, there's a pattern. That pattern finding seems to be more evolution based, and could be found in other animals, for example. So I can't remember the last thing you said. We're definitely going somewhere with this.
I don't know, but it's only a first conversation. There's not a lot of pressure here.
We've got to solve the universe today. This is it. It's happening tomorrow.
And the question that was answered with 42 was, don't have to go that far. Okay. I would point out to you something that I think it's workable. It's usable as an argument against Christianity. It's not a very good argument against the Bible. I think it's fallacious in its fundamental structure. In the statement, whether it be theft or an homage to an older religion, the idea that this religion is based on some prior religion, and thereby, and I've heard many say this, I'm not saying you said this, I've heard many say this, you have already rejected that religion on which your religion is based. Why do you accept your religion? I think that's fallacious, and it's taking advantage of tribal pride within that group, that of course they think they're right. Why does anyone think they're wrong? They'd correct. So then you have taking advantage of a person's tribalism to say something like that religion is false and you believe it's false, thereby yours must be false. Nope, that's faulted thinking. Whether it's theft or an homage to a more ancient religion, this story is told everywhere, and it's only tribalism and pride that makes us reject other recounts of the same story. But that doesn't answer to what you said to me.
I was desperately trying to find a quote from the book that was basically exactly what you said. But carry on. I can't find it.
What book?
It's going to take me too long. Brilliant Biases, by the way. It's
Oh,
out
you
now
have
on
something
Amazon.
on that topic. Good for you. Good for you. That's a personal observation of mine. I have not read your book. I'm sorry.
That's fine. The line is effectively just not paraphrasing, but just sort of subtly different. Is that everyone thinks they are right. We don't walk around thinking I'm wrong about this idea, because otherwise we would just not have that idea.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes, and this is something I mentioned before the stream, is that because of that, we can all, and I really mean all of us, can fall into the idea that we have found the answer. And as such, so sort of the direction of what you're pointing at was actually mentioned before we started, which was there are certain theists that think they're right, and they don't question their ideas as a result. Then there are atheists who think they were previously wrong in their religion, have got out of their religion, and now they think they're right, to which they now don't question things either. So it was that we both agreed before the stream that we should. It's a continuous process. It's not that we should just find out now. Here's the answers. I mean, that's on a fundamental level. It's just basically describing the scientific method. I mean, just constantly, relentlessly questioning, despite us. You know, we know 2 + 2 = 4. Like, we know that it works. It doesn't necessarily, ever come up that it's wrong. But if there were evidence to the contrary, we have to first look at that evidence and say, is that an anomaly? Has there been a mistake made? And if there is, sufficient reason to say, actually, maybe it equals something else, then Nobel Prize gets given, everything gets thrown out the window. But it seems to work because we can see it practically working, because planes are in the sky, because this chat is happening. It wouldn't be if it didn't work, and that might be coincidence, but it's highly unlikely. So yeah,
it's not likely coincidence, and I think some things we can take for granted.
Yeah, there's a line.
As long as we don't get to the end of our knowledge of math, where it starts getting pretty weird. And those are things I don't well understand. I don't claim to. Or if we get too far into philosophy, it's and then we have to start considering things like, well, do you really assign value to justified true belief, and why? And can you really justify your justified true belief claim? Yeah, it's things like that, and it gets real weird real quick.
It's Zorro's arrow is the one I go to as an example. The idea that the arrow must half its distance to the target, and then half it again, and half it again, and philosophically it never reaches the target, but obviously it does. So yeah,
it gets kind of odd pretty darn quick when you start talking about that stuff. So I like to stay to safer topics like religion. That's simple. Yes, I'm not saying that all Christians commit that fallacy, nor would I say that all atheists commit that kind of a fallacy. But there does seem to be in some zealots a dogmatic view of their present position, and it cannot ever change. Now, for me personally, I was a 42-year-old anti-theist making a positive claim there can be no gods. I now understand you can't maintain that, but I wasn't a fan of logic at the time. So you'll have to forgive me. I know that's a great offense to you personally, but I wasn't. So I now know that I could not logically maintain a claim like there can be no gods. That's silly. But I did hold that position relentlessly and considered myself to be an anti-theist. But at age 42, saw evidence to things that the authorship of these stories requires knowledge that we have only recently or have not yet obtained. things we have that are like I said before, is it's only proposed right now as a theory on the table. It's not yet confirmed, and some of the stories require that. Specifically, the series where a planet loses its orbit requires that it's not gravity that's in control of the orbit, although gravity plays into the orbit. It's not actually keeping the orbit of any given planet. That's not what's doing it.
Okay.
There's other forces
I've got
at
something
play.
there.
Go ahead.
So yeah, the very first thought I had there was, under such circumstances, I would just sort of step back into agnosticism and then assume atheism or whatever it may be, whatever. So saying I don't know, therefore I don't believe. Whereas it seems like you're saying we haven't seen the evidence for it yet, so we don't know, but I'm going to assume it will happen.
Yes.
So
I am saying that.
So that's that. Okay, that would be probably the difference in our approaches then. So I've defaulted, and I admit this, I default to something like, for instance, atheism, a leprechaunism,
Sure.
or whatever it may be.
Sure.
Out of a lack of knowledge, there are certain claims that we would undoubtedly agree on, because there's certain illogical sort of structures that say this type of, God or whatever it may be, cannot possibly exist, and there's others that we just don't know. And yeah, I'm glad we agree on that. So what's the driving force for you that leads you to make the assumption that the theory will be proved? And I'm sure I do this as well. This isn't like me just saying, that's the wrong thing to do. I'm saying we typically do that in science all the time. We expect things to happen, and then often it does, sometimes it doesn't. So yeah, what leads you to assume that it will?
In the idea of David Worley uniformitarianism, that you have been like this to this point on this stream, right? I would be able to safely project forward and say David will be like this the rest of the stream, unless something extreme happens. Okay? Because I think you're being honest and you're being yourself, and this is who you really are. So unless I'd said absolutely something very, very insulting or absolutely insane, you would keep at this meter and you would keep going like you are. That is, in this amount of time, I have this amount of evidence that I can say, if it continues, and I see no reason for it to change, that I project in the future a thing I cannot actually give evidence to, that David Worley uniformitarianism will remain. Okay, that is, i.e., trust. Okay, so I have a trust relationship based on past events that I've experienced that tells me that even the future things that are being claimed that have not happened, I trust the authorship that they can also do what they claim they will do. Now, can I prove that? Absolutely not. I can't prove that. It's a trust thing. Am I unjustified completely in my trust? Well, actually, I'm very well confirmed in my trust.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. So that means there's a pattern of behavior that is predictable. And therefore, I'm now intrigued to know what those behaviors were, in terms of those events that were happening that have sort of led to consistent behavior, and how also that you knew that they're coming from the same source. So it's obvious to know that all of my speech is coming from me. It's not like some CGI or whatever. It's these shadows are real, but so there'll be certain claims, such as, for example, the changing orbit of Mercury as a prediction. I assume, therefore, there have been previous events of like a similar stature. We're not talking like you dropped something, gravity exists, therefore Mercury's gonna, you've also had witness to, I suppose, what would be more commonly referred to as miracles happen before, and you at least believe, possibly know, that all of those miracles were caused by the same source, whatever, gods, whatever, and therefore the future event will be also caused by those gods, whatever.
Well, of course, I can't prove the future except in plausibility. I could say something could happen. So if a story is explained deeply enough with enough detail, I could say, okay, that is or is not plausible in reality as we know it within the physics we understand. Okay. But still, it's a future event I can't prove. So all I can say, future plausible. That's all I can say about that. As far as my past experiences that give me confidence and not a knowledge claim, because I take a very serious definition of the word knowledge, that it has to already be true in reality in order for something to be knowledge. So then I'm not claiming knowledge of the future. I'm claiming trust in individuals that they're able to do something in the future, and it looks plausible in logic and physics. As to my confidence and why that I have it, there have been a long series of events, things where I had knowledge without prior experience, and it was educational to me, the knowledge that was given. And I hold value in and this is not authored by me, in the quote, that information is habitually associated to conscious mind. And when I say that, I don't mean raw data, and I don't mean Shannon complexity in information. I mean actual information translating ideas. That if you say something like this, probably the best argument I have against solipsism, actually, if you say something and it surprises me and I did not know it, that's very good evidence that you are separate from me. That even if there is some mastermind or master computer somewhere generating both you and me, and we experience each other within some kind of matrix, that thing is at least very good at not letting other parts of itself know what it's thinking. Something like that. Maybe even it's schizophrenic if it exists, right? Because why should I be surprised by anything you say?
Yeah, so just throwing something out there, it could be that the sort of your reaction is also simulated, like, or not quite simulation theory, but it's along those lines.
Sure. Well, that's another option, but that's not how I perceive it. I perceive it as my genuine reaction.
I'm just looking forward to The Matrix at Christmas. Sorry, carry on.
It's becoming a classic, isn't it? So
it just looks so good. Carry on. Yeah.
So within information theory, the best evidence that I have that other minds exist is that they have experiences that they can tell me about that I didn't have. For instance, there's books in existence. I don't even know the book exists. But just in sheer count of books I'm aware of versus sheer count of books, I'm aware there's books I'm unaware of, except for that they have a count. But I certainly don't know what the topics are. I certainly didn't author them. It's certainly not my mind. It's pretty good evidence it's someone else's mind. Okay? So right. in like manner, when you say something and you translate an idea to me using a known code, sender, receiver, physical medium of translation, transference, I think that you're another mind and communication happened. So when I see something like that evidently happen, I think it's not me. And that just seems evidently true. Now, it's in that way, it's kind of like the Kalam, that it doesn't come to the answer of who is it. It's only evidence that it's not me. Like the Kalam doesn't identify what God. It only suggests there is a God, or maybe even demands, depending on how you value it. But it only says there is such a thing. It doesn't say the name of it or its intent or anything like that.
Yeah, I'd throw out there. I mean, you've probably seen all of the rebuttals to the Kalam. Again, it's just from the top of my head. It's just like everything that is created had a cause. Universe was created, or universe, everything that exists has a cause. Universe exists, therefore universe had a cause. But it's more complicated than that. More detailed.
Yeah, it is more complicated. I'm not really defending the Kalam. I'm just saying the Kalam doesn't complete the story, and neither does my past experience of information alone being given to me. It's only evidence that I had communication. It doesn't identify who I had communication with or what their intent was. So in that way, it's like the Kalam. That part of my experience is like the Kalam. It's not all of my experience, not by a long shot.
Yeah, I mean, again, this conversation is very useful when it's the things that I'm sort of making links to are very sort of futurist based. So immediately I was thinking of Bitcoin because it doesn't show you why you paid them, and it doesn't say like certain information, but it does tell you like who paid who. Like it's just that cool. Sorry, yeah, it's just making links in my own head.
That's interesting.
So yeah. Anyway, I'm not sure if that was useful, but it was useful for me. So when we say these events that went on in the past, or at least could be stories, could be life events. I'm not sure. Is that based on like some sort of anecdotal evidence? Is it something that has been written and passed down? Yeah, I don't know.
You mean my personal experience versus the ancient stories, something like that?
Well, in terms of, so the claim was future event X is going to happen,
sure,
and caused by sort of being A, for example, for following these sort of labels for now. So there were previous events. Let's see how good my alphabet is backwards. So there was event W, V, U, T, whatever in reverse that are now leading towards sort of event X, and maybe there'll be an event Y in the future, whatever. Okay. Those events were also caused by being A. Now, I'm not particularly fussed on whether, I'm not here to prove or disprove being A, right? So when we're saying events, W, V, U, T, etc., are we talking stories from thousands of years ago that have been passed down, or are we talking personal experiences that you have had? Maybe both.
Both.
Okay, so if
my confidence is because of my personal experience that I believe they will also be able to complete the ancient stories. They'll be able to do it, which has not happened yet.
Okay, so just throwing it out there, is your personal experience the colouring in? And is the ancient story the lines that you've attached? You've looked at the structure and you've coloured it in yourself.
Always a possibility.
Okay.
Always. I've actually spent quite a bit of time seriously considering and critiquing this kind of an idea. If I was guilty of my own confirmation bias, if that's indeed what I was doing.
That's the direction I was going in. Yeah.
Some of the reasons I think it's not confirmation bias. There are certain things you cannot have been exposed to. For instance, if you walk into a woodland area and you walk to the center of those woods and you've never been to the center of those woods and you find a certain fungus on a fallen tree, you certainly have never seen that fallen tree or that particular fungus. In the way of identity, that fungus is that fungus, not others like it. You can't have been there. Perhaps it's in a country you've never been to, or something like, or some part of the some forest you've never seen before. If you had prior knowledge, if you were standing at the edge of the wood that you'd never entered before, and you got information in the way of like the perception of a photograph, something like that, of you walking along. Let's make it a movie because that's more true to life. Of you walking along a certain path. You turn this way at this fern that looks like this. You turn a little bit to the right at this tortoise under a shrub, this box turtle under a shrub, and you'll find that particular fungus on that particular fallen tree. If you have that play as a movie, as if you had already done it and you're remembering it, you'd have no reason to believe that would be actual. You'd have no reason to believe that if you followed that path, you'd find that particular fungus. But then upon actually following the path, that fungus is there. Like I could have drawn you a picture before I went to see it myself. Now that's it's actual information, falsifiable in reality. It's true in reality and outside of my experience, yet like a memory in my head.
So just again, to clarify, is that a very specific example from your personal experience? Or are you just giving a general structure?
That was a general structure.
Okay, I was going to say, okay, right. So, yeah, okay. So, what was what would be the specific example then of like a personal experience that you would be willing to share?
Oh, well, all of them actually.
Oh,
I don't find any of it embarrassing, although some of it's kind of funny.
Yeah, I have to throw that out there anyway, just in case. But
it's very nice. So, how very British.
Yeah. We also conquered half the world, so just
that is a known
throw
fact.
That one out there. So.
Just throw that. Also conquered half the world. Okay, we're overly polite,
really
but
nicely.
we're not always overly polite. That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically pioneered slavery, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, that
anyway.
Too.
Sorry.
It's got a long history. Okay. I received a phone call that I had a sibling who was hospitalized. Okay. Right. I'm in West Virginia at the time. He's in Albemarle, North Carolina. Now, not only did my sense of direction get me kicked out of the military where I could not get promoted, because I have some kind of a defect where I can't tell what direction things should be. I get lost in malls. In fact, I get lost by the time I get to the second floor of any given building. I no longer understand where I was parked. By the time I go up two sets of steps, I'm lost. It's just gone. Right. I don't understand it anymore. But I hitched a ride because I did not own a vehicle. I hitched a ride with an 18-wheeler, an over-the-road trucker. He dropped me off outside of the city of Albemarle. I don't have a map. It's 2:30 in the morning. Based on what I had found successful in prayer before, that is internal emotional compunction. It's probably best described, the best way I can think of right now to describe this. With no road signs indicating where the hospital may be, and me thinking there is only one hospital. Turns out there weren't one, there were two. But that's aside from the point. When he woke in the morning and asked me how I'd gotten there, I described to him the following. I didn't know what exit I got off at because I was tired and half asleep and I wasn't driving. So I don't know where I exited the truck. He asked me, what did you see? Because he knows the area. I went through a series of landmarks and the kinds of roads and the kinds of things that I saw to get to the hospital. And according to his account and understanding of the area, I had walked 12 miles, give or take less than a mile, plus or minus. I had walked 12 miles in about 4 hours, taking the shortest route possible directly to the hospital, based on how I felt that I needed to go to get closer to my brother.
Okay. So like an internal compass is what it feels like. Is always what you're saying.
But understanding I'm making a request in a meditative or prayer-like state. I'm asking for information on purpose.
Right. Okay.
I'm purposefully out because I don't know what to do. I got nothing.
You're saying like which direction next?
Yeah, I'm asking the question.
Okay. Right. You're right.
And then identified a positive response as something would feel like I'm closer to my brother. Something like that.
Okay.
So what I did was I walked down to the road till I got to an intersection, which 2:30 at night, there's a little bit of light in the sky. You can tell the town is approximately that way. It's about all you can tell. There was no traffic, no people, no one to ask, no gas station, no map. I got nothing. I walked to the intersection and slowly turn, feeling toward which way is the correct direction, asking and feeling which way is right. And did take the as far as I know, the shortest route possible to first try the correct hospital. No signs for hospitals along the route. In a foreign town that I don't know, with a bad sense of direction.
Okay. Yeah. Well, first and foremost, were they okay?
Yeah, he made it through the surgery okay. It was protein stranded, a special form of pneumonia that surrounds the lungs and restricts them to the point of death eventually.
Wow. So that was just completely sudden. They didn't have any like pre-existing anything.
Well, I actually had pre-existing a lot of things because he's morbidly obese. And he has sleep apnea and trouble breathing anyway, and is diabetic. So he had a lot of things that he was blaming the symptoms on that weren't the problem, and letting it go until he really let it go too long, and ended up with an emergency surgery. They essentially vacuumed him out and gave him antibiotics. Yeah.
I find these sorts of stories fascinating because I don't know enough to say. People speak of gut instincts and intuition as if they are sort of like guiding lights, as it were. So I've never had this experience myself. So you're saying as well that this is, again, just sort of clarifying, you hitched a ride, they dropped you off what would have been
on the bypass around the town.
So that would have been about 12 miles out. It's early hours of the morning. You're saying there was lights to the town, so I'm imagining you're on slightly higher ground and you're sort of looking down at.
No, it's a forested area. You can't see any distance.
Okay, right. So there's still a road that's going through it. Just to clarify, I'm not trying to sort of like debunk you or anything.
No, I wish you would debunk it. Actually, I wish you'd be aggressively in debunking on purpose. I hope that's understood, that what you're here to do.
Well, first and foremost, I'd say I want to clarify the position.
Okay.
More than anything, as a because these sorts of conversations can last like hours and hours and multiple conversations, and I think the very first thing we should sort of demonstrate is how to have the proper conversation, rather than saying let's just dismiss this immediately, because otherwise I succumb to the thing that we were just talking about, which is coming to a conclusion too quickly. And so I mean, very first thing, and I do mention this in the second book, Brilliant Biases, is that the first thing is to question yourself. So my initial thoughts are there's another reason that is, or multiple number of reasons that can explain this. So, for example, if there aren't many roads in that particular area, you're not going to go in that direction because that's back to the motorway, the highway. So you're going to go in this direction. Okay.
Yeah, generally,
Then
I
there's
out of the 4 cardinal directions, I definitely had 2 major directions to start with, kind of toward town, away from the highway, obviously.
and there's no signs whatsoever along
There's
the way.
street names and stuff. There's there's little neighborhoods. There's forest. There's a lot of information that I don't need.
Right. So I'm just trying to visualize these sorts of 12 miles and how this stretches out. So you've got the start, which is the turn, and you've been dropped off. Then there was woods.
There was a pretty nice neighborhood and a patch of woods.
Okay, so are we talking like, again, because I don't really know the geography, I'm imagining in America there's just like a small hick town and there's one road, and then you just follow the one road. Like, is it a sprawling metropolis of like just roads in every direction, like Tokyo, where it's just mad? Or are we talking there's at least a limited number of options?
Not till I got closer into town and the road started multiplying. At first, I literally had 2 choices that weren't obviously wrong.
Right.
But I only had 2 choices to start with. Both of them went through pine trees that were some 30, 40 feet tall. I didn't measure.
That's pretty much what I was imagining. Yeah.
Yeah. And the general area has like rolling hills of no height. Like you can't see any like mountain or anything above the trees. You only see 20 degrees of sky between the trees. That's all you can see. Because they just cut the trees, the road right through the forest. That's it.
And I'm just gonna throw this out there as well, as per our previous sort of musings. You're not following the stars. You're not.
I wish I knew how to do that. That would be great.
Yeah, I just at least throw it out there.
But I didn't have a direction for where the town was compared to the stars anyway. All I could say is there's lighted area in the moisture in the sky in that direction. It's basically all I got.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, you could, under high winds and it's low visibility anyway, but you'd be able to say, look, clouds are going in that direction, winds going in this direction. If I've walked that way and it's taken a certain amount of time, the clouds would have got that far away. Like you could do that sort of intuition as per we're just used to the weather, and I know that if I walk for 5 minutes that it would move that much under that speed. Like I'm not doing the maths in my head, I just know because I just I've been around for long enough.
We're pretty good at estimating mathematical things. Actually, humans are remarkable that way.
Yeah, so it was just sort of, again, that would be considered part of our intuition.
I don't think it is, but just the same might be. It's probably labeled that way.
Yeah, it's something that we are used to, and we don't consciously figure out.
Right.
So, yeah, okay. So, I'm struggling to think. Certain bits of this story wouldn't add up for me. So there'd be one claim which would be prayer. Is it like a general concept? So we could go into that. We could go into like when it actually got into town, as it were. You would probably say that it would have to be better lit, and by then it would have been, if it took you 4 hours, so you would end up, this is still sort of pre-sunrise.
It was still dark when I found the hospital. Yeah
so I mean, it's tricky to try and critique, because I don't know exactly how that would happen.
What would happen?
How you would find a place? It's in a sort of the story that you describe is remarkable to the point where I wouldn't be able to initially just sort of listening to it right this second. I'll probably think about it and I'll go away and I'll come back and I'll have more questions. But initially, I wouldn't have an explanation as to why that would specifically happen unless your options were absolutely restricted and that there's missing information going on. So if you're saying there's sort of limited number of roads, limited number of hospitals, is it clear that that hospital is a hospital? Is it the only tall building in that particular area? Are there, was there something that was just...
Are you giving examples, or do you want me to answer these?
I'm throwing things out there, but you can answer them in that you could say, for example, if you saw, for example, an ambulance wasn't might have had the lights going, whatever, in that direction, and you had followed it, but it was completely like you didn't acknowledge that that's what you saw,
right?
Because as soon as you get close to the hospital, your memory of the event, your anecdotal evidence of the event becomes sort of thinned out, and you were only stating the key moments that happened, whereas actually there might have been a moment, or probably several moments, which was, I did see a sign that said could have been police station, and you said, right, I'll just go in that direction to see, like, I'll ask for directions for that sort of they'll probably be able to help me out, maybe give me a lift, or whatever. So I think there's unintentional omitted information.
There could be. That would be a reasonable explanation right now.
Yeah. Sorry, it took me a while to sort of like articulate that.
It's fine.
But yeah, it's almost impossible to try and get that information out of you, because you wouldn't remember. I mean,
I do remember quite well. Absolutely every bit of it, I think. I didn't read and memorize the house numbers of the 3 houses that I saw at the edge of the neighborhood as I was walking away from that neighborhood. I can't recall the house numbers, but there was a cabbie dropping someone off at one of the houses and coming out of that neighborhood. And I asked him where was the hospital, and he said there were 2 of them. And he said, what's the name of the hospital? And I couldn't recall. And he said, well, then I can't help you because I wouldn't know where to take you unless I took you to both hospitals. And I said, well, I have no desire and not that amount of money that I would ask you, and we'll just drive around till we find my brother.
Right. Okay.
That was the only running vehicle I saw that night until the woods opened up and there was town. Like, the woods went all the way to downtown. And here's downtown. And I come up on a knoll and I can see under an overpass, and there's the hospital.
So initially, I'm just going to throw it out there because just my initial interpretation. I may have completely misunderstood this. So you're walking along. Car would obviously be much quicker. I don't know how far down the journey, because you have at this point have no idea how close you are. It could be next to you, it could be miles away, right? You don't know that it's 12 miles away. You don't know. Yeah. So if this person has a car and a sense of direction locally,
I'm sure he did, being a cabbie.
I would have gone to the point where, and again, this might come across in a completely wrong way, and I really don't mean it like that.
I wouldn't worry
But
about it.
I would have paid anything for the right person.
What would you have paid
for
with
him to take? Well, it could be some sort of IOU, or it could be like it could be so much as a sob story, and saying, "Look, I'm not from this place. I'm trying to find such and such." If so, that taxi driver could be like, "Okay, I've got to go off to a job now. What I can do is point you in the right direction." So they give me information. They might be able to give part way of the lift, so they could have given me a lift like along the way, but then they couldn't take me any further, like because the taxi driver has to go in that direction anyway for their next job.
I'm sure he would.
Yeah, so I would have at least asked the question: is it possible for that to happen? I know it's like a little bit of extra weight in the car, and therefore it might cost you a little bit extra fuel. I don't have anything on me, but if again, what year did this happen, by the way?
What year was that? It was 2013.
Okay, so fairly recent. So we've got sort of
late 2012,
card
early
payments
2013. I don't really somewhere in there.
Okay, so I'm thinking, because in terms of like taxi drivers today would accept contactless and things like that. So I'm just working out the sort of structure as to how you could go about paying this person. But yeah, anyway.
Well, according to my past experience, the best thing for me to have done in that situation is not to bother with the taxi driver, but just walk there with no directions. That would be the best option.
Is that hindsight?
No, it was in the moment what I realized, because so many other things had been successful so many other times that I felt like no matter whether I knew where it was or not, or familiar with the town or not, or a sense of direction or not, I would still be led the right way.
So I'm going to ask a separate question, but a similar question. Is that gambler's fallacy, in that you would say...
Could be. What is that?
An event has happened. So best explained with roulette. It says red has come up 10 times, which means black is now more likely, except it isn't, because each rotation of the disc is individual, it's separate from every other. It's independent from every other rotation. So you could just have 17 or 25 reds in a row. The probability is exactly the same. So
well, I don't think that's a fair comparison. If I'm talking about an intelligent source that can make choices, I don't think that's a fair comparison, because that's not random at all.
So just to clarify, the intelligent source is
something not me.
Being A.
Sure.
Yeah. So whatever that may entail. And so because of events GHIJ,
right,
in your past, that you now expect these sort of event, let's say event T, which is this event,
right,
to happen, and as such in the future you expect event X, which is Mercury, happening. Is
right.
That right? I'm getting it right. Okay, so
I mean, what's been most successful in the past, and especially considering I didn't have any money, I don't know what I was going to offer a taxi driver, how I'd find him again to repay him. So I'd just be going off of his goodwill toward mankind. Maybe if he agreed to that, and I don't know that, because I would consider immoral for me to have like offered like physical services or something. I would never do that. That's just not who I am. I'm not saying there's necessarily something wrong with it, but that's not who I am. But I just had nothing to offer, and every time I needed to find something else, I was directed toward the thing that I needed. This is one story of at least 5 like it, and at least 200 that are not almost exactly the same story.
Right. So I'm thinking about this specific sort of coming together with this particular driver. So what specific information was passed on? Because they, for example, would have driven off in a particular direction, and
Yeah,
I assume
I
you
didn't go
therefore followed that direction, or
I
didn't.
didn't get on the bypass at any point. I
Oh,
didn't
so
walk on the bypass.
okay, so they would have gone off on a just completely random different directions, and they didn't even so much as say go in that direction.
He went to the intersection where the trucker dropped me off. I know that was wrong for me.
Right. Okay.
And was out of sight in a minute. I don't know, less.
Yeah, would have been less. I mean, my point is it therefore you already knew the direction you were going in? So I'm just imagining one road.
Generally toward town.
They've gone that way. You've gone that way.
I mean, obviously, a bypass is a bypass. It doesn't go toward town. It goes around it.
Okay, so you've got a frame of reference in that regard. Sure. Doesn't say anything specific about any location. I'm trying to do the maths as well. So you're averaging 3 miles an hour, which is
something like that, I guess.
Casual walking pace. So
bearing in mind I don't have any physical challenges, and I was prior service. I'd done a lot of walking in my life.
Okay, so you're not in possession of any mobile device or any communications device,
or a compass or a map.
Okay,
nothing on me like that.
Oh, just quickly, because you said you had no money. How did you get into the sort of lorry driver's truck to get dropped off in the first place?
Asked him. He said yes.
Okay, so I would initially question, wouldn't the same thing possibly happen to the taxi driver?
I don't think a taxi driver and a trucker are the same thing when the trucker's already going that way and only just has to like drop you off in the area. They're not trying to bring you to a location. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the taxi driver would have been really, really generous, but he didn't seem to have a lot of patience for me.
Right.
And seemed to want to be on his way. And he said, well, there's 2 hospitals and I don't know which one you need to go to. And I'm not. And he's just kind of like, sorry. And that was pretty much it. He left.
Okay. Right. Yeah. So, it would be difficult in that scenario if he's in a rush to do anything.
I don't know. Maybe he already had another fare lined up. I don't know.
Possibly. Okay. So flesh out the 4 hours as well. So
it was boring.
You got dropped off. There was you remember each point. So there's woods, it's town. It opens up. There's the actual city, not town. What I meant before was like houses, and then woods opens up. There's the town. You follow the town. So how far along your 4 hours was the actual once you sort of saw the town and the woods opened up?
Mm-hmm.
Was that like an hour until the hospital? Was it 3 hours until the hospital?
Okay, so I saw a little neighborhood as soon as I was dropped off at the bypass, right?
Right.
And I started walking into the woods. I had 2 directions I could have gone. I saw one little neighborhood along the way in the woods. There were 4 or 5 turns all in the woods. And then when the woods ended and there was cleared area, there were lots of streets and man-made structures and overpasses and lights everywhere.
Yeah.
And I took 1, 2 more turns, and when I crested a little hill, I saw the hospital.
Okay, so just
So it
again,
was
out of
Woods was
interest, what did it
probably
look like?
85% of the walk. 90% of the walk
Oh,
was
okay,
Woods.
right. So interesting. Okay, what did the hospital look like? How did you know that it was a hospital straight away?
How did I know it was a hospital? Had a
It was
big plus sign on it,
okay.
and the
So
name
again, just
and the name
yeah,
of the hospital
clarifying.
was in like 4 foot tall neon lights.
But you didn't
Which
know it
was
was
like
the
a
hospital.
light
You
purple color. I
it could have
recognized the
been one of
name once
two.
I saw the name of it. I
Oh,
had
so you
heard the
okay? So
name
you,
before. I wasn't able to
right.
remember it talking to the cabbie, but once I saw it in print, I went, "Yep, that's it."
What is it
And it is the
out of
only
interest?
hospital I saw. What's that?
What is the name of the hospital? Can you
I have no
remember
idea.
now? Okay, that's fine. It's irrelevant information, but okay. So when again, so if it's 85% wood, are we
Mm-hmm.
talking like a car road through the wood, or are we talking like a
2 lane,
path written? Okay, a walking
2 lane undivided.
written. Okay, so there was a physical road. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
So
paved road. Yeah.
right, so the the turnings themselves provide like a carry on straight or left, for example. Is that what we're sort
Most
of
of them were
going
cross
to?
intersections.
Okay, so that could have been
You
three
got three options
directions.
from where you're already going.
Okay,
I don't
were
remember one
you
that wasn't a 4-way.
okay? Right. So
There was one that was a dead end. There was one was a T intersection. That's true.
okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So did you?
Where I came up from the lower part of the T into a direct 90-degree right or 90-degree left.
Okay,
There was
so
one of those, I think.
out of all of those crossings, did you go forwards as opposed to left or right more or less often?
Did I go more or less often forward than left or right?
Yeah, so each time did you go forwards, then forwards, then forwards, then forwards, or did you go left and then forwards and then right and then?
Oh gosh, let's see. First
It's
first
only
intersection.
asking.
Hold on. First intersection. I was led to the right. Second one went straight through. No, first one was left. Next one was straight through. Next one was a left. Next one was a right. Next one was a right. Next one was a left. I'm pretty sure.
Okay,
I'll give
so
that 85% true.
yeah, that's fine. I'm not that. Yeah, there's no quiz.
It's hard to
But
remember. I wasn't writing it down.
yeah, of course. So in terms of anecdotal evidence, that's why it's so difficult. But obviously, we're working within the constraint of actually reaching it before sunrise.
No, I wasn't in any particular hurry.
No, as in like uh, I
You mean
for
I
instance
happened to
can
get there before the sun rose?
yeah. So
Yeah, I did.
what I
Yeah.
mean to say is that I'm working within a restriction that says I can't now say you actually took much longer than you thought. It was specifically between like a 2:30, which was probably something that you
It
roughly
was
saw
something
in the
about it
lorry's
was something about 6:30 when
clock,
I got there. Yeah, it was
and then you
just before
checked the
6:30.
clock when you got there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And obviously the light didn't change. So yeah. So okay. Right. So if you're saying again, if you weren't in such a rush to get there, there wasn't like an urgent. I mean, it sounds like the reason you took this journey was because it was urgent.
No, just because I love him, wanted to see him. Heard
Okay.
he was hurting. I had lots of spare time.
Okay. That's fine. So if
Like nobody thought he was going to die or something. By the time the whole family had heard about it and the story had gotten to me, he was already in recovery and stable.
okay, well, that's good.
2:30 in the morning, he was already stable. You know, he was already asleep in his bed and was going to be there for a few days.
Okay. I'm thinking as well, because naturally I'm drawn to the limited nature of these different turnings and these options, and you taking the correct path. And then when it gets to the town, initially that might be more difficult. I mean, was a particularly small town? We're not talking like a huge city trying to just find a hospital. Was, you know,
it's not a real big city. It's not. I don't know if I had to summarize how big of a city. I don't know the population of Albemarle, North Carolina. I don't know what that number is, but I'd bet it's less than 1 million. But I'd also say it's probably over 20. It's probably over 80,000.
Yeah, I'm just trying to check. How do you spell that? Albemarle.
ALBE. Album MARLE. I think it'll autocorrect from there. That's close enough.
Is that Albuquerque? Did you say, or Alabama?
No. Albemarle.
No, sorry. Albemarle. Where is that? North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Did you say?
Sorry, North Carolina. What state? North Carolina. Yeah.
The state. Yes.
It's either North or South Carolina. It's one of those Carolinas.
Okay. So initially, I would say there would be signs on how to get there close to the actual place. So the woods bit is the sort of more interesting bit. So I'm imagining a road.
Okay.
It goes in one direction for 99% of the journey, but there's crossings. And those crossings are interesting. Were there any signs at those crossings or anything distinctive?
There were street signs.
Okay. Right. So were those street signs would have names of places you don't know, I assume?
Yeah. I think if I remember, most of them were like local famous people names or like presidents of the United States and stuff like that.
Interesting. Okay. So would there be, because you wouldn't be in Albemarle, was it possible that those signs, like one of them would have Albemarle on that sign, and therefore you would just naturally be drawn towards, let's go that way?
I've seen roads like that in certain places. I don't recall there being an Albemarle road or a hospital road or downtown road or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because again, I don't know the geography of this particular.
Don't feel bad.
Place.
I've been there and I don't know it.
Oh, so it says Albemarle. Again, this is going on Wikipedia. I do apologize. The population was about 16,000 in 2010
that
census.
Is really small. Yeah.
So that's just giving me a sort of perspective. It's not.
I had no idea it was that small.
It's not tiny. It's
16,000 is pretty small. Like I'm surprised that with a population like that, there are 2 hospitals.
I wouldn't know. I'm guessing. Just trying to explore this idea a bit further. So,
no, you raise a good point. I never actually saw the other hospital. There might be only one. The cabbie was wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I'm just thinking as well. There's this point at which you went over the crescent. Did you say over the hill, and did you say that you saw the hospital straight away? This is probably the biggest building.
I could actually see the top of the hospital, but not the sign. From about the second turn after I left the woods. But it wasn't until I crested a hill and I could see the sign on the side of the building that I knew that it was that correct word.
Okay. Yeah. So in sort of intuitively, if I'm looking at a load of different buildings, the hospital typically does stand out in that part of the journey. It's not a skyscraper, and it's not
Right.
like a bungalow or anything like that. So it's of a particular size, it's of a particular shape. It's just practical. I'm guessing. I mean, this is digging a little sort of too deep into details, but it's I assume taxpayer funded, possibly, or is it private?
I don't know if it was a private or if it was taxpayer funded hospital.
Okay.
I don't know that.
Yeah. So I the only reason I bring that up is because of like the efficiency with which it is built. It
It's a
would
big
need to
blocky
have.
building. It was very
Yeah,
square and
that's
about the
exactly
same
what I'm
width
thinking.
as height on the
Yeah.
end, something like that.
Yeah. So when I drove back to university, it was right back where I used to live and where I was born, and I had to drive past the hospital where I was born, like basically every day. And that's what I'm imagining right now. A big blocky building has to have a lot of space around it for car park. I don't know whether was the car park of this particular hospital, was it like multiple story, or was it sprawled out?
I don't
If
remember
you
it having
remember.
like a parking garage, but it was just a big parking lot.
Okay, so there's no buildings next to it, is what I'm saying.
There's a good bit of open space next to it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that there's a big blocky building that stands out and isn't like hidden by anything else. That's what I'm saying. So
Right.
it's a very clear building that could be seen from a distance. A small town like 15,903 is what it specifically says. 16,000 people won't have a skyscraper. So
Yeah. I
it's
didn't see
probably
any.
one of the biggest buildings, I'm assuming.
From where I was, from my point of view, it was the biggest building. The only thing that was taller in my view was an overpass.
Well, yeah, okay. So you're not going to mistake
But
that
that's
for.
only because the overpass was closer to me.
Yeah,
It wasn't actually
okay.
taller than the building. It was just closer to me.
Right. So initially, my thoughts would be your options are limited. You knew the town where it was. You got dropped off within 12 miles. There are possibly signs that are pointing you in a direction. Because again, I don't know whether these are like the intersections, whether they're roads that are sort of like left. It looks like a major road, like a proper road, and whether straight ahead looks like a scrawny little sort of back road, which is not even
I
got
wouldn't have
tarmac
labeled
on it.
something like that a road.
Yeah.
No,
Okay. So
when I say most of them are cross intersections, and I think one of them was a T, maybe two of them were T intersections, but I seem to recall there was at least one T intersection out there, away from town, that they were all about the same age, about the same quality. All of them were 2-lane undivided roads. All of them had signs at the intersections and signs nowhere else for anything else, and were generally not inhabited by people. There weren't houses along the whole way or anything like that.
Okay. I obviously am always very skeptical when it comes to the specific recall of these anecdotes, because I don't know how many times these stories have played out in your head and how much you've
And the more you
repeated
review
it,
it,
and
the more you
therefore,
alter it. Yeah,
yeah, and
it's fact.
maybe, yeah. So certain things would be amplified and certain things would be minimized. So there'd be missing information, and like the key bits are the bits that you've obviously given me, and then ask again in 10 years, and that might have altered slightly. It doesn't mean you're lying or anything. It's just
No, I
it's just
understand
the way
that function of the human brain. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
So
remember the last time you recalled it, you don't remember the event.
yeah, that's a fair point. I think maybe some things sort of come back after a while. Anyway, yeah. So my line of questioning would always go towards, you've got limited options. You eventually get to the city, and it's the biggest building, and it's going to be a very distinctive building that you get to. That last bit I'm not so worried about, because I mean, that's what I would do. I'd just go towards like that direction. It looks quite substantial, it's not going to be any of those little houses here. I'm going to go over to there, and I'm eventually going to find it. How did you know, by the way, that was the right town? Was there only one town?
Albemarle?
Yeah, so was it surrounded by other towns, and you could have ended up in some different...
When they told me that he was in the hospital in Albemarle, they included the name of the town. I repeated that to the trucker.
Okay, so my point is, when you're walking along for 4 hours or 3.5 hours before you get to the town, or however long, how did you know that town was Albemarle? Was there a big sign saying Albemarle?
I didn't see one.
Okay, so you didn't know until you got to
the hospital that I was in the right town.
The right town.
I didn't even know. Okay. I couldn't have proved it was the right town. I couldn't have proven it.
Sorry, stream just went off and then back on again for me. So it's just back now.
I didn't even see you flash.
Yeah, it was on my end, I think, for connection. So I don't want to ignore the live chat. Iron Charioteer says the odds were tipped in your favour. I don't know what you make of that, or in fact what anybody has been saying in the live chat. Hello to everybody. If anyone's got anything new to add, throw it in there. I've probably missed a few bits, and I'll come back in a few days and be like, damn, I should have said this or that.
Well, come back and say it.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
Yeah, I definitely would. I mean, it's coming up to 1 a.m. for me here.
Yes, I know. But I'm sorry.
That's absolutely fine. What I would say is, in terms of, excuse me, a line of questioning, I'm gonna, I'll go away and I'll think about this particular story before we even get onto such questions as, okay, let's accept that event T that we've just described is absolutely 100%, as you say it is. What would then lead you to believe it, that certain events are linked or being caused by prayer, or your belief in sort of being and what that is? And there's loads of different conversations that we haven't gone into.
Right. Do you have, before we wrap this up, because we are at like 2 hours, and I do want to be considerate, and you've been more than kind staying this long. I expected you only stayed about an hour, considering the time of day where you live. Do you think there's any questions I could ask myself? Like, if you were the one telling this story, what kind of questions do you think you would ask yourself that might disprove it to you?
I mean, first thoughts, I would say, however which word we use, intuition, gut feeling, whatever, we have more ability than we think. And I'm going to compare it probably quite loosely here to just giving a child a piece of technology, don't tell them anything, and they will teach themselves how to do it. We just have that. That's just
pretty
part
amazing,
of us. It's just like incredible, because you get like the stories of I think there's those the computer in the wall, like there was a hole in the wall thing where Indian children taught themselves English from a computer, and they weren't even told how to use computers, and they taught themselves, just coming back to it every day. Like it's that sort of thing. So I would argue that there were certain forgettable parts of the journey that were cues that were pointing you in the right direction, and it's almost impossible to even think about that. What I might say is try and, if you've got the time, and you say you're semi-retired, so you might have the time, Have you ever thought about going back and trying to retrace your steps?
For what?
So just to try and see like what was there. So just doing it during the daytime and just knowing, okay, I think this was the junction I was sort of dropped off at. And I think, maybe would that intuition or whatever happen again? So if you were to say, I want to go back to the hospital, test the claim again, basically have a repeatable example of the claim. So you can say, I took whatever series of turns. Don't even try and remember. Like, I don't say like don't do it blindfolded or anything. You'll probably get run over, but try and
not at 2:30 in the morning in that town, man. Nothing's moving. 16,000 people. They're asleep. Nothing's going on at 2:30.
Yeah, don't do it at that time in the morning. This time of year, it's too cold. Actually, yeah. What time of year was it? Was it in the summer?
Brisk out. I don't remember if it was spring or fall. It seems to me that it was fall or maybe early winter.
Yeah, I'm glad.
I think that's true. I'm not sure.
Please potentially put off any reconstruction of the event until it's warm enough. Yeah.
Maybe a nice warm summer night would be a good time.
Take a flask.
I don't want to draw it out, but I said that I have 5 of these stories. What I meant was practically the same thing in different occurrences. Needed some place to sleep, was in a town I wasn't familiar with. I even argued this was only 2 weeks into that. I believed there could be something that a Christian would call prayer. Not that I think that's the best label, but anyway, because they don't actually define what that means, and it's a horrible label for that reason. I mean, there's no definition to it from Christians as they describe it. But I actually objected and argued to where I was being led, to where I was like, no, this can't be right. This can't be right. I must be wrong. This must be my bias. This is not working out, and felt like giving up, but stood there arguing, requesting shelter, looking at a stand of pine trees. Pine trees are not shelter. It was cold and it was starting to rain. A person with no resources more than just a waist jacket, a winter waist jacket, and no sleeping bag, no tent, no nothing. A Bible in his hand can freeze to death in a situation like that. I didn't want to freeze to death. So I stood outside of the pines staring at them, arguing this is wrong. I know something is wrong. It's probably my fault. Okay, fine. But I know this is wrong because this is not shelter. Stood there so long arguing that my hips got uncomfortable, shifted my weight, and when my head moved, I saw something white in amongst the pine trees. And I couldn't tell what it was. I bent down and looked under the pines, and it's a camper shell in the middle of a stand of pines. No path in, no path out. I had to crawl into it and crawl out in the morning. Just for instance.
Interesting.
Like it was a property that was for sale. It was in a neighborhood I'm not familiar with. It was an undeveloped area between houses in West Virginia, which there's a lot of that in West Virginia. But you don't find a perfectly good camper shell with no glass busted out of it in every stand of pine trees you look in, obviously.
Yeah, we'd need a lot more time to flesh that one out. But, interesting. I mean,
it was only about 400 feet away from where I requested that I needed shelter, which was a fast food restaurant at 10:30 at night. They were closing the doors. You can't stay at the Burger King all night if they don't stay open all night. That's the rules.
Damn. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. We could probably explore those other stories another time. I'm very happy to. There's always the similar, as you mentioned at the very start, similar structures that come along with all these different stories. And so, okay. Yeah, there's definitely space to ruminate.
It would be proud and assumptive of me to say something like spend time on this, but If anything happens to your brain, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm trying to always explain these things from a rational
Practical,
perspective.
provable,
I'm
rational,
sure you
yeah.
are as well. Yeah.
I'm trying.
So
I'd like to.
the only thing I'd ask, and if it's probably best to sort of go away and think about this as well, is there anything that could disprove the claim, or anything that has happened that would suggest that either the event was caused by something else, or being A didn't exist, or it didn't answer a particular prayer or whatever.
I've spent a lot
that'd
of
be
time on
another
that
hour of
question.
conversation.
I think that the only thing that I could suggest is that there is recently some evidence to certain human beings who have contacted a lot of metal, and that there are actually micro deposits of iron in their brain, and they have an intrinsic sense of direction that can be shown outside of their opinion by putting them in a magnetic field and watching how their brain reacts to a magnetic field. They can't see, they can't hear the magnetic field or anything. And it's not asking them questions and seeing how they react to the questions. It's watching the brain change as the magnetic waves change. And the brain will actually like start guiding neurons in certain directions and certain paths under certain stimulus of magnetic fields. And I don't feel like I have that, or I probably have a better sense of direction and wouldn't have got kicked out of the Army and would have been a career soldier. But apparently that does happen in human brains.
Yeah, I would have no idea. So I would be amiss to comment on that.
You can watch.
I'd have to look it up.
You can watch on your YouTube the gentleman that has the channel Veritasium. He subjected himself to that same experiment, and they gave other evidences of other people's brains and how they reacted. Like the subject isn't even aware that they're like on a fully conscious level. They're not even aware that their brain is doing something different. Or in some cases, they don't seem to be aware that their brain's doing something different in that moment. Like if two human beings simultaneously watch a film and are interested in it, their brains will do about the same thing at the same time because they have the same stimulus. You know, whether they like it or not, it'll just happen. Yeah. I will ponder that further, and please feel free. Like, you never know; it could be 2 minutes from the time we say "Have a great night," and something pops in your head. Just email me. I'd love to hear about it.
Sure thing. I hope as well for those who are watching. I hope more than anything that we're demonstrating how to have a conversation about these things without sort of instantly dismissing the other. Because if I'm going to bring this into the second book, and Shill, then one of the key things that I've been saying over the course of this book series is how to have that conversation, how to have a healthier conversation, and how to, more than anything, successfully change a mind, whether it's somebody else's or your own. And as such, there's certain things that have been done by both of us, probably completely subconsciously, whereby we have followed things like Rappaport's rules, which I bang on about all the time, which, for those who don't know, is not misrepresenting the other person, trying to clarify their position, stating where we agree with each other, stating where we don't know and where we need to learn more about a particular topic. No, definitely for me, I don't know everything about every single religion, especially ancient religions. And it's only then do we have a stable foundation whereby our criticism is actually thought about and it's pondered, and we do go away and we think about these things. Because if we didn't do those things, and we didn't have this particular manner of how we're having the conversation, then we would be more likely to dismiss one another, So yeah, I appreciate more than anything the actual manner with which we are having this conversation.
I appreciated you as well. You called it Rappaport's rules. I called it Mom would beat your butt.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. My mom was hard lady. Fair,
Yeah.
but really hard. David, thank you so much. Not just for showing up, but being more than generous and patient. And I don't think that was effort. I think that was in your nature. I think you were just being you. I don't think you were being something besides you. But I appreciate you for as you are. I found it very entertaining and thought provoking. And I thank you for your time. And I would love to do it again whenever you have, I don't know, a cancellation, a moment of boredom, whatever, anything at all. Okay.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'd love to come back and continue the conversation and get a part 2.
I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much, David.
Thank
To everyone
you.
in the viewing audience, everyone who might watch this in the future, there's going to be a link in the description for David's now second book about logic and clear thinking, how to be self-critical and not just critical of others, but how to improve yourself, which I think is an amazing idea and something I want to promote in my own life and something I think it has value in anyone's life. So thank you all very much. Anyone who watches this in the future, thank you as well. And until next time, peace and respect to you all. And I want you all to know that I truly look forward to the day that we're all great friends. Peace. Thanks, David.
Take care.